Fleur-de-lis, the blood oath Fleur-de-lis. A mafia true story of power, family, and betrayal. The silence before the storm. The old city slept under a heavy veil of rain, its narrow alleys shimmering with reflections of neon signs and the faint glow of street lamps. Somewhere in the distance, church bells rang midnight, a reminder that even in a city drowning in sin, heaven still demanded its presence. But inside the mansion of the Bellanti family, silence reigned. At the long dining table, where laughter and wine once flowed freely, only shadows remained. The silver cutlery was polished, the crystal glasses ready, yet no feast was served tonight. Instead, a solitary man sat at the head of the table. Don Alessandro Bellanti, patriarch of one of the most feared dynasties the city had ever known. His black suit was pressed, his tie perfectly knotted, yet his eyes betrayed fatigue. The lines on his face were carved not only by age but by decades of battles fought in the underworld. Wars over territory, smuggling routes, political favors, and blood debts that had long been paid only with more blood. In his hand, he held a glass of red wine, swirling it slowly as if it contained the answers to the questions haunting him. For Don Alessandro knew his empire was crumbling. Not from the police, not from rival families, but from within. Chapter 1. Sons of the Same Blood. The Bellanti mansion was a fortress, its high stone walls scarred by decades of violence. To outsiders, it was a palace of power. To those inside, it was a gilded cage where loyalty was demanded, and betrayal was punished without mercy. Don Alessandro had 3 sons. Each was destined, in his own mind, to inherit the empire. And each carried within him the seeds of both greatness and destruction. Lorenzo Bellanti, the eldest, was a man of ice. Calculating, disciplined, with a sharp mind for business. He studied law, not to practice it, but to understand the very system he would one day corrupt. To the soldiers of the family, he was cold and distant, yet they respected him. Marco Bellanti, the middle son, was fire. Impulsive, passionate, with a temper that could turn an argument into a bloodbath. He commanded loyalty through fear and charisma, often leading street soldiers into reckless battles. To the young men of the family, Marco was a hero, or a devil. And then there was Adriano Bellanti, the youngest. He was different, quiet, thoughtful, more of a poet than a gangster. He played the piano in the great hall when others planned heists and assassinations. To his father, Adriano was a weakness, a son unfit for power. Yet sometimes, the quiet ones see the most. The rain still fell when the brothers gathered in the great hall. Don Alessandro sat in his leather chair, flanked by portraits of his ancestors, men who had built this empire with blood and iron. His sons stood before him, each casting long shadows on the marble floor. "You are my blood," Alessandro began, his voice calm but heavy. "But blood alone does not make a dynasty. Loyalty does. Discipline does. Without it, we are nothing but wolves tearing each other apart." Lorenzo straightened his tie, speaking first. "Father, the streets respect us because they fear us. But fear fades when rivals sense weakness. We must strike the Romano family now, before they grow bolder." Marco slammed his fist on the table. "Talk, talk, always talk. The Romanos insult us, spit on our name, and you sit here swirling your wine. Give me 20 men and I'll burn their casino to the ground by sunrise." Adriano remained silent, his eyes fixed on the rain outside the tall windows. Finally, he spoke softly. "Every war we fight costs us more men, more trust, more family. Perhaps the Romanos know this, and perhaps that is their plan. Not to kill us, but to make us kill ourselves." The room fell silent. Don Alessandro studied each son carefully. In Lorenzo, he saw the strategist. In Marco, the warrior. In Adriano, the philosopher. And in all 3, he saw danger. "You will not destroy what I built," Alessandro said at last. "If one of you betrays the family, I will know. And the punishment will be worse than death." That night, as thunder shook the sky, each brother retired with his own thoughts. Lorenzo wrote letters, plotting alliances in the political world. Marco sharpened his knife, dreaming of vengeance. Adriano sat at the grand piano, playing a melody so haunting that the servants paused their work to listen. And somewhere beyond the walls, in the darkness of the city, the Romano family prepared their own move. For in the world of blood oaths and silent wars, destiny was already writing its script. And betrayal was always closer than family dared to admit. Shadows over the empire. The rain had passed, leaving the city washed and gleaming beneath the pale light of dawn. Market stalls opened, children ran through narrow streets, and priests unlocked heavy church doors for morning mass. To ordinary people, the day was just another struggle for survival. But for the underworld, the morning was another battlefield. At the Bellanti mansion, the air was heavy with tension. Servants whispered as they polished the marble halls. Guards lingered longer at their posts. Even the dogs in the courtyard barked more than usual, sensing unrest in the hearts of men. Don Alessandro had called for a council, a gathering not only of his sons, but of his capo regimes, the lieutenants who commanded the family's territories. These were men hardened by years of bloodshed, men who lived and died by loyalty. And yet, beneath their loyalty simmered ambition, envy, and fear. The council gathered in the great dining hall. Candles flickered despite the daylight, casting long shadows across portraits of past dons. Alessandro sat at the head of the table, his presence commanding silence. Lorenzo, Marco, and Adriano flanked him, each son wearing his ambition like a hidden dagger. "Brothers," Alessandro began, his gravelly voice echoing, "our empire stands at a crossroads. The Romano family challenges us. Politicians grow restless with our influence. The streets hunger for blood. We must decide our path." Rocco Santoro, the oldest capo regime, leaned forward. His face was a map of scars, his eyes sharp with suspicion. "Don Alessandro, with respect, we should strike first. The Romanos grow bolder each week. Their casinos, their smuggling docks, all expanding. If we wait, they will consume us." Lorenzo spoke before his father could answer. "Violence alone does not win wars, Rocco. We need influence. The mayoral elections are near. With the right alliances, the Romanos will find themselves crushed not by bullets, but by laws bent to our will." Marco sneered. "Laws? Politicians? You sound like a coward, brother. Power is not won in offices. Power is won when your enemies are buried 6 feet under and their widows kiss your ring." The room tensed. Capo regimes exchanged glances. Some nodded at Marco's fire, others at Lorenzo's logic. Adriano spoke softly, almost to himself, but his words carried. "Every empire falls, not because of its enemies, but because of the rot within. If we tear each other apart, the Romanos won't need to lift a finger. They'll watch us destroy ourselves." Silence followed. Even Marco hesitated, his anger flickering. Don Alessandro finally raised his hand. "Enough. This family was built on loyalty. If one of you forgets that, son or soldier, I will remind you. With fire and with blood." That night, the Bellanti mansion was restless. In the courtyard, Marco gathered a circle of young soldiers. They smoked, laughed, but their voices trembled with excitement. Marco spoke to them not as their leader, but as their brother in arms. "The old man has lost his teeth," Marco said, pacing like a caged tiger. "Lorenzo wants to sit with politicians. Adriano wants to play piano. But we are wolves, not sheep. The Romanos spit on us, and we do nothing? No. Tomorrow we strike. Burn their casino to ashes, and let the city know the Bellantis still rule the night." The soldiers cheered, their loyalty to Marco outweighing their fear of Alessandro's orders. Meanwhile, inside the mansion, Lorenzo sat in his study. Piles of documents and maps covered his desk, shipping routes, bank accounts, political bribes. His mind worked like a machine, cold and precise. He knew Marco was reckless. He knew Adriano was too gentle. He knew only one truth. The empire could not be trusted to anyone but him. As he wrote a letter to a corrupt senator, he whispered to himself, "Father sees us as sons, but I see us as rivals, and rivals must be dealt with." Adriano, unaware of his brother's schemes, sat alone at the piano. His fingers danced across the keys, filling the empty halls with a sorrowful melody. To him, the piano was not an escape, but a confession, every note a truth he could not speak aloud. That night, as the music drifted through the corridors, a maid paused and whispered, "It sounds like a requiem." And perhaps it was. Far from the Bellanti mansion, in a smoke-filled backroom of a Romano casino, Vincenzo Romano, the rival Don, listened to his lieutenants. He was younger than Alessandro, but ruthless, ambitious, and patient. "Our spies tell us the Bellanti brothers fight among themselves," one lieutenant said. "The eldest plots with politicians, the middle stirs the soldiers, the youngest dreams at his piano." Vincenzo smiled coldly. "Good. A family divided is a family ready to be broken. We will not strike yet. Let them tear at each other. When the blood begins to flow, we will walk in and claim the sea. Rhone." He raised his glass of whiskey. "To the death of the Bellantis." The room echoed with laughter and the clinking of glasses. But outside, the storm clouds gathered again over the city. The stage was set. Brothers sharpened daggers against each other, enemies watched from the shadows, and Don Alessandro, old lion of the underworld, felt his empire slipping through his fingers. The silence before the storm was ending. And when it broke, no man, Bellanti or Romano, would escape the flood. Fire in the night. The city never truly slept, but that night it trembled. Neon lights flickered over narrow streets, prostitutes leaned against crumbling walls, and the scent of rain still lingered in the gutters. Yet beneath the hum of nightlife, there was a tension, an unspoken warning. Something was about to break. Marco Bellanti had made his decision. In the dead of night, he gathered his loyal soldiers at the edge of the docks. Trucks idled in the shadows, their engines rumbling like restless beasts. Inside, crates of gasoline, Molotov cocktails, and stolen weapons waited to be unleashed. Marco's eyes burned with fury. His fists clenched as if he could strangle the very air. "The Romanos think we're weak," he growled, pacing before his men. "They laugh at us in their casinos, drink wine bought with our blood, and spread whispers that our family is finished. But tonight," he pointed toward the glowing skyline, where the Romano casino loomed like a temple of sin. "Tonight, we burn their pride to the ground." The men cheered, young and reckless, drunk on Marco's fire. They didn't fear the Don's wrath, nor the law, nor even death. They feared only irrelevance, and Marco promised them immortality through violence. With a wave of his hand, the trucks roared to life and rolled into the night. Inside the Bellanti mansion, Lorenzo studied maps and financial ledgers under the dim glow of a desk lamp. He had already caught wind of Marco's plan. His spies whispered of gasoline, of soldiers gathering in shadows. Lorenzo leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "Fool," he murmured. "Marco wages war with fire, while I wage war with silence." But instead of stopping his brother, Lorenzo saw opportunity. If Marco succeeded, the Romanos would be enraged, throwing the city into chaos. Chaos Lorenzo could exploit to seize political power. If Marco failed, then Don Alessandro would see him as reckless and unfit, leaving Lorenzo as the natural heir. Either way, Lorenzo won. He poured himself a glass of wine, savoring its bitterness. "Go, brother. Light your fire. I'll be the one who warms his hands by the flames." Adriano, meanwhile, sat by the piano once more. His music drifted through the halls, haunting, mournful. To him, it was a way of begging the world to stop, to listen, to remember that beauty still existed even in the shadows of crime. But the walls did not listen. His family did not listen. The world outside his melodies was deaf, and soon it would drown him in gunfire. At midnight, the attack began. The Romano casino blazed like a beacon of hell. Marco's men hurled Molotovs through windows, flames devouring velvet curtains and gold-plated walls. Patrons screamed, scrambling for the exits as chandeliers crashed down in showers of glass. The air filled with smoke and terror. Marco stood at the entrance, pistol in hand, grinning like a madman. "This is Bellanti territory," he shouted, his voice carrying above the chaos. "Tell Vincenzo Romano that we are not afraid." Gunfire erupted. Romano soldiers, caught off guard but not cowards, stormed into the fray. Bullets tore through the night, shattering bottles and bodies alike. Marco fought like a lion, roaring with every shot, his men falling one by one around him. The city itself seemed to wake. Sirens wailed. Windows opened. People whispered from balconies. The war has begun. Back at the Bellanti mansion, Don Alessandro was roused from his sleep by frantic guards. He stormed into the hall, his robe trailing like the cloak of a furious king. "What madness is this?" he roared. "Don, it's Marco," a guard stammered. He's set fire to the Romano casino. The streets, they're at war." For a moment, Alessandro's face was unreadable, carved from stone. Then came the fury, an old lion's roar that shook the room. "Marco," he whispered, but the whisper was deadlier than any scream. At the Romano stronghold, Vincenzo Romano stood on a balcony, watching the flames consume his empire's jewel. He did not rage. He did not curse. He only smiled, cold and calculating. "Send word to our allies," he said calmly. "The Bellantes have declared war. Now, let us show them the cost." By dawn, the casino was nothing but smoldering ruins. Bodies lay in the street, blood mingling with ash. Marco limped back with a handful of survivors, his face smeared with soot, his heart pounding with triumph and dread. He had lit the fire. But now, he could not control the blaze. The Bellanti family stood on the edge of war. And in the shadows, Lorenzo sharpened his ambitions, Adriano prayed to a god who no longer answered, and Don Alessandro prepared to remind his sons that empires are not inherited, they are earned in blood. The lion's wrath. Dawn painted the city in gray, smoke still curling above the ruins of the Romano casino. The streets were littered with burnt-out cars, shattered glass, and whispers of fear. Everyone knew it now. The truce was dead. In the Bellanti mansion, silence ruled. Guards shifted uneasily in the hall, servants kept their heads bowed, and the air carried the tension of an execution chamber. Don Alessandro sat at the head of the long dining table, his eyes hard as granite, his robe replaced with a tailored black suit. He was no longer a father this morning. He was the Don. The doors swung open. Marco limped inside, his body bruised, his shirt stained with blood, not all of it his own. His chin lifted proudly, as though he were returning from a victory march. Behind him, only 6 soldiers remained alive, their faces pale with exhaustion and terror. "You dare return to me," Alessandro said softly, though his voice cut sharper than any blade. Marco smirked, dropping a half-burnt cigar onto the table. "I did what you were too blind to do, father. I struck first. I showed the Romanos that the Bellanti blood runs hotter than theirs." The room froze. Soldiers and capos exchanged wary glances. No one spoke when the Don was speaking. Alessandro rose slowly from his chair, each movement deliberate, like a predator circling prey. "You call it bravery?" His voice deepened. "I call it recklessness. I call it betrayal of everything I built with these hands." He slammed his fists onto the table, silverware clattering like gunfire. Marco's jaw tightened. "Betrayal? I bled for this family. I burned for this family." "You bled for your pride," Alessandro roared, his eyes blazing. "You lit a match that could burn our entire dynasty to ashes. You gambled with the lives of your brothers, your soldiers, your city. And for what? To hear your own name whispered in the streets." The Don's hand shot out, gripping Marco by the collar, dragging him close. The old man's strength was terrifying, forged from decades of power. "You are not my heir," Alessandro hissed. "You are a danger, and I will not let one son destroy what 3 generations built." For a heartbeat, Marco's bravado cracked. Fear flickered in his eyes, but only for a moment. Then he grinned through clenched teeth. Better a lion who acts than a sheep who waits. Alessandro released him with a shove, turning his back in disgust. "Go. Get out of my sight before I forget you are my blood." In the shadows of the hall, Lorenzo watched the scene unfold with quiet satisfaction. Every word Alessandro spat at Marco was a brick in the wall Lorenzo was building toward his own throne. He saw Marco's humiliation, his rage boiling beneath the surface, and he knew, His brother would not forgive this. Later, as Marco stormed into the courtyard, Lorenzo approached him, hands folded behind his back. "Brother," he said calmly, "father is harsh, but only because he fears losing control. You should not take his words to heart." Marco glared at him. "Spare me your poison. I know you, Lorenzo. You'd stab me in the back if it meant sitting at father's table." Lorenzo smiled faintly, as if the insult were a compliment. "You wound me. But remember this, the Romanos will strike back soon. When they do, father will need someone who can control the chaos. If you cannot, perhaps I can." Marco shoved past him, muttering curses, but Lorenzo's smile lingered like a shadow. Meanwhile, Adriano had witnessed it all from the edge of the hall. His heart ached as he listened. Two brothers tearing each other apart, a father spitting venom, a family unraveling. He returned to his piano, but his fingers trembled on the keys. The notes that flowed were no longer gentle laments but violent, crashing storms of sound, echoing the chaos outside. One of the servants paused in the doorway, listening with tears in her eyes. "The young maestro," she whispered. "He plays the sound of war." And war was coming. That very night, Vincenzo Romano struck back. His soldiers ambushed a Bellanti convoy on the outskirts of the city, setting the trucks ablaze and executing every man inside. Their bodies were left on display, hanging from overpasses like a message written in blood. When word reached the Bellanti mansion, Alessandro stood on the balcony, fists clenched. The lion was caged no longer. "Summon every capo, every soldier," he thundered. "The Romanos think us weak. They think us divided. Let us show them the fury of a dynasty united." But the truth, hidden from the Don's eyes, was that the Valentes were no longer united. Marco dreamed of revenge. Lorenzo plotted his quiet rise. Adriano prayed for peace in a family that no longer understood it. And in the shadows, the Romanos sharpened their knives, waiting for the Valentes to destroy themselves. The Council of Knives. The Bellanti mansion's great hall was transformed into a war chamber. The long mahogany table stretched endlessly, covered with maps of the city, photographs of Romano soldiers, and stacks of weapons gleaming under the low chandelier light. Around it sat the capos of the dynasty, old wolves with scarred faces, younger soldiers with burning eyes, and lieutenants who had carved their loyalty into their very skin. Don Alessandro sat at the head, his presence commanding silence before a word was even spoken. His cane rested beside him, though all knew he did not need it. The Don was a lion, and lions never leaned on sticks. Behind him stood his three sons, each embodying a different path of the family's future. Marco, bruised but unbroken, his restless hand always hovering near the pistol at his side. Lorenzo, calm and calculating, his gaze sharp as a dagger sliding between ribs. Adriano, silent, almost spectral, hands folded behind his back, eyes heavy with sorrow. The Don's voice finally broke the silence. "The Romanos hang my men like cattle. They set fire to our blood. They spit on the Bellanti name. And you ask me what we shall do. I will tell you. We will answer with fire, with thunder, with death. For every Bellanti life taken, 10 Romanos will fall." The table erupted in a chorus of approval, fists slamming, voices rising, glasses lifted in toasts of vengeance. But not all shared the fury. Old Capo Salvatore, his beard white as snow, leaned forward, his voice gravelly. "Don Alessandro, we have fought wars before. Wars drain men, money, loyalty. The people turn on us when blood floods the streets. Are you certain this is the path?" The Don's eyes narrowed. "You dare question me, Salvatore?" "I dare remind you," the old man replied, unflinching, "that empires do not fall from enemy blades, but from rot within." A hush fell. The words struck deep, too close to the truth. Marco slammed his fist on the table. "Enough of this cowardice. If we wait, the Romanos will grow stronger. We strike now, strike hard, and wipe them from the map." His voice was fire, his rage a storm. Lorenzo spoke next, calm and measured, slicing through Marco's fury like a knife through silk. "Brute force wins battles, brother. But cunning wins wars. If we burn everything, we lose not only soldiers but businesses, allies, influence. Let us cut the Romanos not with fire but with precision, silence their lieutenants, choke their money, bleed them slowly until Vincenzo himself is forced to crawl. The capos murmured in agreement, their heads nodding toward Lorenzo's strategy. Marco's face darkened, his fists trembling with restrained violence. Adriano finally spoke, his voice soft but carrying. Perhaps neither path is salvation. If we answer blood with blood, the streets will drown. Our children will inherit ash. Maybe we should seek peace. The hall exploded in outrage. Peace. One capo spat. With animals who butcher our men. Another roared. Adriano stood firm, his eyes on his father. Peace, or we will destroy ourselves from within. This war is not ours. It is pride, it is vengeance, it is poison. For a long moment, Alessandro said nothing. His eyes flicked from sun to sun. Marco's fire, Lorenzo's shadow, Adriano's plea. 3 futures, 3 roads, each more dangerous than the last. Finally, the Don stood. He raised a glass of blood-red wine. The time for doubt has ended. We are Valentes, and Valentes do not kneel. Tonight we swear, for every drop of our blood spilled, theirs will flow tenfold. He drank, and one by one, every capo followed. The Council of Knives had spoken. The war was sealed. That night, while the mansion still echoed with vows of vengeance, Marco sharpened his blade in secret, whispering promises of his own glory. Lorenzo penned letters to allies in foreign cities, weaving a web that even his father could not see. Adriano sat at his piano once more, his music trembling with grief, a requiem for the living. And outside, in the labyrinth of the city, Vincenzo Romano smiled as his informants relayed the news. "Let them fight," he whispered. "Let the Valentes destroy themselves. I will be waiting to claim the ashes." Betrayal in the shadows. The city trembled under the weight of war. Streets once alive with music and markets now echoed with the thunder of gunfire. Black sedans prowled like wolves. At night, windows stayed shuttered, and mothers prayed that their sons would not vanish into the dark. The Valentes struck with fury, burning Romano warehouses, assassinating lieutenants in restaurants, sending bloody warnings nailed to church doors. The Romanos bled, but they bled with teeth bared, retaliating with equal cruelty. Yet amidst the chaos, a serpent coiled within the Valente ranks. Lorenzo, ever the tactician, had grown restless under his father's iron hand. He wanted not just to win the war, but to reshape the family. To turn the Valentes from a dynasty of brute force into an empire of silent power, reaching beyond the city into governments, banks, and the very soul of the nation. But Don Alessandro's thirst for vengeance blinded him. So Lorenzo made a choice. A dark choice. In the secrecy of night, he met with Romano envoys. In the back of a dimly lit cathedral, shadows bending like conspirators, he whispered his plan. "I will give you Marco. His fire blinds him. He will lead himself to slaughter. In return, you spare me, and when my father falls, I take his throne. You will have peace, but only through me." The Romandos listened, their cruel smiles glinting in the candlelight. They agreed. Days later, Marco led a raid against what he believed was a Romano stronghold. It was a trap. The ambush was brutal, a slaughter. Marco fought like a lion, mowing down enemy soldiers, his body riddled with bullets, refusing to kneel. But in the end, even fire dies. The Valente soldiers dragged his broken body back to the mansion. Don Alessandro fell to his knees at the sight of his bloodied son. His roar of anguish shook the house. Only Adriano suspected the truth. He saw the shadows in Lorenzo's eyes, the quiet satisfaction he could not hide. Chapter 7. The Last Supper. The Valente mansion was cloaked in grief. Marco's body lay in the great hall, candles flickering around him, the air heavy with incense and sorrow. The family had gathered, every capo, every soldier, every loyalist. Don Alessandro stood at the head of the hall, his face carved in stone, his cane gripped like a weapon. He raised a glass of wine, his voice trembling with fury and grief. "My son fought like a lion. He died as a Valente, and so we shall honor him, not with tears but with vengeance." The men roared in approval, but among them, distrust festered. Whispers of betrayal crawled like rats. Adriano could no longer stay silent. He rose, his voice steady but sorrowful. "Father, brothers, this war is not vengeance. It is betrayal. Marco was led to death, not by Romano bullets alone, but by a traitor in this very room." The hall froze. Eyes darted, hearts raced. Don Alessandro's gaze sharpened, like a hawk hunting prey. "Speak, boy. Who dares betray us?" Adriano turned to Lorenzo, his brother, his blood. It was him. Lorenzo struck the deal. He gave Marco to the wolves. Gasps filled the hall. Lorenzo did not flinch. Instead, he smiled, cold, calm, unapologetic. "And what if I did?" he said, his voice dripping with venom. "Marco was reckless. His fire would have burned us all. I did what had to be done. I secured our future." Don Alessandro's cane shook in his hand. His eyes, once filled with pride for his calculating son, now burned with rage. "You are no son of mine." Lorenzo laughed bitterly. "No, father. I am more than your son. I am what you could never be. You ruled with fear. I will rule with power. The Romanos will not destroy us. I will rebuild us from their ashes." He reached for his gun. But before he could fire, a shot rang out. Adriano's pistol smoked. Lorenzo staggered, eyes wide, blood blooming across his chest. He fell at his father's feet, whispering with his last breath, "I would have been king." Silence crushed the hall. Don Alessandro lowered his head. A single tear cut across his weathered face. Then he spoke, his voice heavy with finality. "The Valente name is cursed by our own pride. Tonight it ends. Ashes of a dynasty." Weeks later, the Romano banners flew over the city. The Valente Empire had collapsed. Their businesses seized, their soldiers scattered, their allies gone. Don Alessandro, broken by grief and betrayal, vanished into exile. Some say he died in the mountains, others that he still wanders, a ghost clinging to a lost throne. Adriano, the last true Valente, walked away from it all. He left the city, left the blood, left the shadows. Only his piano remained, its melodies drifting into the night, carrying both sorrow and hope. The Valente dynasty had risen like kings. They had ruled with fire and iron. But in the end, they fell not by enemy blades, but by the betrayal within. And so the saga closed, as all empires do, not with glory, but with silence.